My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Pound. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And then we pick the same geek culture and put it under the microscope again.
Beeper.
Because we're doing. Okay.
Very good. Well, first of all, congratulations. We talked about your wedding on the podcast last week, so give everyone a short update on what married life has been like.
I've spent one day with my wife since we got married. No, two. I've spent 2 entire days with my wife since we got married. Other than that, one of us had to work, so it's been not so very different, but it's also been very nice and very good.
Yeah, I noticed you said wife with like no slip in your voice or hesitation, so clearly you're already used to calling her that.
That was one of the first things I did was go into our Facebook conversation, not change my status to married. She did that before I had a chance to do it, but to change our nicknames in our conversation, I changed her name to my wife, all caps, exclamation mark, and I changed my name to Laser Wolf. For those who don't get that joke, it's a Fiddler on the Roof joke. Musical jokes, always funnier than anything else, right? But basically, there's a song in which this guy's singing about his betrothed, and yeah, I mean, you know the song "To Life L'Chaim"?
No.
Really? Oh, okay. Well, anyways, there's this guy struck a deal with the father of his future bride, and so the father is singing "To Seitel, my daughter," and then the guy who's gonna marry her shouts, "My wife!" I hope I didn't bust anything by doing that, but yeah. So it's a musical joke, and she likes musical, and so do I. So it's a good time.
And also, just a note, anyone who listened to last week's episode, I want to apologize for the audio quality on my microphone. I don't know what it was, but the way we had the room set up, my microphone sounded super quiet, as if I was like talking from far away. So I apologize for that, and hopefully you came back this week. I made the comment that you're like the third co-host I've had that has gotten married since starting on the shows, and
all of them ditched you.
So first of all, we don't take any credit for you guys getting married. That was totally independent of the podcast, and that certainly has happened. But I hope that that we keep you around as long as we can, Beef Pork Ribs.
I hope so too. I'm back 1 week after getting married, so it's already a step in the right direction.
Very good. So I don't know, maybe because you were so busy planning for your wedding, were you aware that the new season of The Mandalorian started streaming?
Yes, we actually caught up with it. Yes, last night. Just last night we watched the first 3 episodes. If there's a 4th one that came out that I don't understand, but yeah, I was vaguely aware of it, and I have seen them now. So yeah, it's been interesting. I like it so far.
I'm grateful because, as people might remember, I'm watching Star Wars Rebels right now, and I'm at the point where some of the things that are introduced in The Mandalorian actually were also in Rebels and even Clone Wars before that. So I have a little more insight into some of the things that are going on in The Mandalorian. So for example, the whole thing about not taking off your helmet, the way the first season of The Mandalorian presented it to us, it made it seem as though like that was the way of all Mandalorians, that they never took their helmets off.
It is the way.
But across all the different Star Wars media we've seen, there have been lots of cases of Mandalorians who don't follow that. And we finally, in this week's episode, I think it's chapter 11, and we find out that actually what Din Djarin calls the way is actually just like one section of Mandalorian culture.
Oh, a religious sect, basically, which makes sense. But also, I mean, the most predominant Mandalorian armor-wearing character was not actually a Mandalorian, so, and his armor appeared again, so, and so did
Wait,
he, which was great.
yeah, that's something I just learned this week as well. And my roommate was actually disappointed to hear that indeed Boba Fett, the character that originated this whole Mandalorian culture of Star Wars, is in fact not a Mandalorian, because his father Jango Fett actually just stole the Mandalorian armor he has or
That's
had.
also and I believe that was covered in the Clone Wars TV show. Somebody makes a comment about how did that bounty hunter get a set of Mandalorian armor.
Well, I haven't watched Clone Wars yet, but I'm starting to realize that some of the same creative people like Dave Filoni, who created Clone Wars, is also involved with the Mandalorian, and it seems like more and more elements of what were introduced in the animated shows are coming now into live action. So I don't know. I guess I got to start watching Clone Wars. Part of me just wants to stop watching Rebels where I'm at and then just go back to Clone Wars. And
I mean, that
but
would be the logical thing. It does come beforehand. Like, you know what I mean?
yeah. But at the same time, I'm too invested in the specific story of Rebels to stop at this point.
Fair enough. Although I've heard, from all accounts, I've heard Clone War was better. Not like massively, but it is like better. They're both good, but Clone Wars is better. Had similar conversation with Mjornil last night. We're like, oh yeah, we should probably watch these shows now, and we have Disney Plus. But you know how it is. You got too many shows you're trying to follow, especially when you're following them with somebody else. It gets pretty difficult to juggle.
Exactly. But today's episode, we're going to talk about legacy characters, but before that, we're going to talk about some news stories, and I'm curious how you'll react to some of this stuff, Beef Pork Ribs. First of all, it has been confirmed that the man himself, Sylvester Stallone, will be making an appearance in James Gunn's Suicide Squad movie.
As
An unnamed character.
okay.
Does that excite you? Does knowing how many other actors are already in that movie?
Not even remotely, but I've never been a big fan of Sylvester Stallone. I am sure Mjolnir will be very excited because she loves him. But I don't know. I've never been a big fan of him, and I feel like most of the big 80s action heroes got better at, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger. You look at Conan the Barbarian and Hercules and it's terrible, and you look at, like, his more recent roles and you're like, okay, he has developed. I feel like Bruce Willis and Sly have done the opposite. They were a lot better when they were younger, and now they've kind of become stereotypes of themselves. I feel like Bruce Willis is probably more notorious for it, but I feel like Sylvester Stallone also kind of has covered that a little bit. I don't know. That's my hot take on Sly, but I wasn't super excited about that movie anyway. It was one of those things where I saw the previews and I think we talked about it. I'm like, I want to be excited for this, but I can't be because there's just too much up in the air, and also I don't know, will it be original enough to stand on its own? It's a lot of questions. I have more questions. I think it's like, I don't think it's going to be a bad movie. I just have more hesitations and reservations about the movie than um, things that excite me.
Okay, how about this? This is a bit older now in terms of news, but Benedict Cumberbatch has been confirmed to return as Doctor Strange for the new Spider-Man movie.
I mean, but why are they mixing Doctor Strange in? Like, I don't know. I feel like if it is something that, like, they're trying to set up magic in the universe a bit more, and therefore he's going to be also in the Spider-Man movie, then I can get behind that. But I feel like Spider-Man and magic users don't often mix that much, and he tends to be, he's Spider-Man. He's more personable with his villains and personal, and I don't know.
But there's more.
Oh, jeez. Okay, now you're gonna make me regret saying something.
Jamie Foxx has confirmed to be returning as his version of Electro in this Spider-Man 3.
So they're pulling an X-Men. That's what I'm hearing right now?
Well, there's rumors that this will be a multiverse movie because the next Doctor Strange is called In the Multiverse of Madness. So if you bring over Jamie Foxx as Electro from the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans into this movie,
I'd heard that they were gonna get Garfield and Maguire to come back as Spider-Man, which
yeah, that's still a rumor. That hasn't been
okay,
confirmed yet.
yeah, because Mjolnir. Although I thought about it after Mjolnir mentioned it, I think that like Garfield, I'm not so sure. It's an interesting case, but you could definitely have Tobey Maguire be a Peter B. Parker character right now. You know what I mean?
And just for people who don't know what that means, you're saying Peter B. Parker as in like the older kind of
The
bummed
older,
out
washed up
Spider-Man. Yeah,
Spider-Man.
from
Yeah,
Into the Spider-Verse.
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, there are rumors that they're going to bring those other two back to play their Spider-Man. I'm holding out till there's something official, but we do know that Doctor Strange will be in the movie, and so will the Jamie Foxx Electro.
That's unfortunate. The Jamie Foxx Electro, not the not the Doctor Strange coming back. I
Okay,
just
how about this?
yeah.
It was just announced this week that Chris Pratt will be returning as Star-Lord for the new Thor movie, which is called Love and Thunder.
Yeah, that I'm fine with the Chris Pratt or Star-Lord being involved in a Thor movie. That I was surprised he wasn't in Ragnarok. Not just because of the overall feel of it, but it's no. I think that's a little bit more exciting. The other news you've given me were far less exciting than that.
Now, you still have not seen Infinity War or Endgame, correct?
Oh no, since we last spoke, I have in fact I'd seen Infinity War. I saw Infinity War in theaters, but I had not until recently seen Endgame. I watched it about a week ago, I think, something like that.
Wow,
Something
you hit
about not being allowed to get married to Mjolnir until I had seen it.
that's incredible.
It's
God bless you.
100% not true. This is a joke, but yes.
Okay, so then from seeing those movies that there's obviously a logical reason why someone from the Guardians of the Galaxy would be showing up in the new Thor movie because that'll be released before Guardians 3 comes out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's solid. I can see that. As little as I am currently invested in the MCU, I can see that being a thing.
Now, it's unclear at this point how big a role he'll have in the movie. While we know like the Doctor Strange thing and Spider-Man is like a main part, like he will be in the movie for a significant amount. It's unclear to me if this Chris Pratt appearance in Thor will be like kind of like how Iron Man was in Spider-Man Homecoming. If maybe he'll just be in the
Right.
first like 10 minutes. It's like, okay, bye Thor. Like you were with us and now you're not. See you later.
I mean, I can see all of these things going well, and I guess that the Doctor Strange being integral if they are making a Spider-Verse movie, or a multiverse Spider-Man movie, I can get behind. It's perhaps not my favorite idea, but it's not terrible. But I don't know. The other ones just don't sound that exciting to me. And also, I've talked about this a lot. I've got kind of Marvel fatigue and superhero movies. I'm honestly a lot more excited about other movies. I've recently watched a video on YouTube by one of my favorite YouTubers who usually does Dungeons and Dragon things, but he's also an author, so he made something about Dune the book and hoping that some of these things will be in the movies, and it got me hyped for Dune again.
There's also a speculation that Vin Diesel will return as Groot for the Thor movie because he's arrived in Australia where they're filming. But for Groot, it's like I don't even think Vin Diesel has to actually be on set because he just does the voice. So that I think that's just clickbait.
Well, I mean, I also I recently had this conversation with somebody about how I don't really like Vin Diesel, or any of his movies, and then I was like, okay, wait, but there is Groot and the Iron Giant, and then I thought about it, and honestly, you could watch the Iron Giant with no voiceover, and it would probably still hit just as hard. And as demonstrated, I don't know, Groot didn't really have much of a personality until the second one, where it was, mini Groot, and then it wasn't really Vin Diesel doing that much for the voice. So, if Vin Diesel is back, good for him.
Okay, last bit of Marvel news. It has been confirmed that WandaVision, which will be now the first Marvel Disney Plus show, will be premiering in January 2021, as opposed to it was earlier stated like coming soon. So the people were thinking it would arrive on Disney Plus like towards the end of November, but it'll actually be in January. Are you excited about this one?
Somewhat. I I think the Wanda, like, because the WandaVision is likely pretty heavily based on the events of things like House of M and or Avengers Disassemble, maybe, or even from perhaps the other. Oh, I forgot the one shot. The series where they are married, but which kind of leads to those events. I'd be interested to see if they kind of play into bigger events. But beyond that, not super invested in those characters, though I will definitely be made to watch that show. It is the thing that Mjolnir has been the most excited about since they announced some Disney Plus shows. Even I think more so than the Loki show, which is pretty impressive. Like,
Yeah.
our wedding colors were green and gold. That's how much she loves Loki.
Well, admittedly, I'm excited for WandaVision because as the Mandalorian is kind of showing me, it's like really that is like the new TV I'm watching now is stuff that gets put on Disney Plus or streaming shows. So it also makes sense that they're waiting till January because that's probably means that'll be right when this season of the Mandalorian finishes airing new episodes. So people paying for a Disney Plus subscription will be forced to hold on for another month if they want to also check out WandaVision. So that's just a good business move. Zack Snyder's Justice League. There's things on social media saying that something is coming on Tuesday, November the 17th, which people may remember was indeed the theatrical release date of the Justice League movie 3 years ago. So the thinking is that we're going to get our next look at what the Snyder Cut is going to look like. Has your enthusiasm changed at all for the Snyder Cut since we last talked about it?
Was I very unenthusiastic last time we talked about it?
I can't remember. I want to say you were kind of meh.
Yeah, I think I've steadied myself there.
Oh, boo! Come on, directors
I
getting a chance to finish their vision. Blah blah blah.
yeah, I get all of that, but I also don't think it's like, I don't know. I don't feel like it's redeeming the movie or anything at this point. I feel like it's just trying too hard to do something.
Fair enough. So you will not be eagerly awaiting the whatever announcement they make on Tuesday.
I do not think I am eagerly awaiting the Snyder Cut.
Oh, boo! Well, I will be waiting for whatever they show us on Tuesday. I've tried to follow the news about it a little bit to try and I'm interested, but the problem is I don't want to get spoiled for anything that does actually end up being new material for me. So it's a weird balance I'm trying to make.
But I feel it's also a weird balance. Like, I guess we talked about this already, but to be saying, it was his true vision, but he's also had several years to think about it now and to try to fix the things that the people didn't like. So I don't know. I think that's part of why I'm not as excited. Is just like, well, it could be great or it could be meh, and either way, it's not going to change anything about what the movie was originally or how it's played in the kind of greater cinematic universe that they're trying to do.
Fair enough. And the PlayStation 5 launched this week, and I have heard very little about it. Really, the only thing I know about the PlayStation 5 is they have this Miles Morales Spider-Man game that's kind of a part of the launch, which I've seen footage of, and it looks really nice and all that. So I'm sure you've talked about not being really a console gamer in the past, but are you familiar with anything that's being said about the PS5?
The most common thing I hear is people saying it'll have PC graphics. I'm like, well, then just buy a computer. Like, I understand, like, especially now in a time where controllers usually have USB or Bluetooth and can be hooked to computers just as well as consoles. And with Steam have and other, online gaming platforms having gotten to where they're at and cross-platforming existing, I honestly don't understand getting an Xbox or a PlayStation. The only game I still understand getting is like console is the Switch, because Nintendo is still doing things that are original and that are not basically making your console a PC. Because, well, then just buy a PC. You can do better things.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. PlayStation 5, no point in getting it. I'm sure the graphics, like I have like seen a lot of memes like comparing the graphics, and because with PS5, yes, they have the Spider-Man Miles Morales game, but they also have done like a refresh of the Spider-Man game that came out 2 years ago, and I've seen a lot of screen kind of comparisons from like the PS4 to the PS5 version, and yeah, it looks better, but I don't know if it's like hundreds and hundreds of dollars better. Maybe if you're really into the graphics, it is, and perhaps there'll be more information about the PS5 as time goes on. I've also been told that generally people don't buy new consoles right away because there might be bugs, and therefore they wait a while. Is there any truth to that?
I'm probably, but I'm not aware of that being something specifically for the PlayStation 5. But I mean, look, if we're releasing movies with patches, um, you know, because the Cats movie, which apparently I'm gonna have to watch soon, why not do it for consoles? But I think that, although I feel like at this point they've had enough time to make it, they should be pretty well suited to not have any problems with it. But who knows? Maybe we'll see it explode and there'll be a massive recall like that those phones on the airplanes. But most likely people are just not buying it, or not buying it immediately, because they realize they the price is going to go down.
Fair enough. Well, I'm sure there'll be more information about all these things we've talked about as time goes on here. So let's just talk about our bat jar topic for today. This is something that I threw in there a while ago because it's a thing that's in superhero comics that I think may exist in other forms of media as well. And I find it hard to talk about, and I find it hard to explain, and I have a hard time like articulating it for people. So, you know, buckle up, people. We're here to talk about legacy characters. And before we even get into it, beef pork ribs, what would you say is your general understanding of what a legacy character is?
A legacy character is a character that is too profitable to kill. I think that's I don't know. I think that's probably one of the most basic way to look at it.
Okay, can you expand, like, not, yeah, expand upon that for me?
Well, I mean, basically, it's characters that will keep showing up in different iterations of a media or of a franchise, no matter what, and will always have a place in it, and will never kind of um, gotten rid of, even if like the persona changes, or even like despite like any change that happens, that character in some way, shape, or form is still going to be there, either with the same name, the same uniform, kind of like they just remain the same. Like, uh, I don't know. I'm trying to think of in a weird way, kind of like the way that Doctor Who does. It's always the Doctor. It's always the same character, even though it changes. They still maintain it's the same show and the same thing. That's not the best example, but it's imagine that, but with superheroes.
Okay. So I have a definition from TV Tropes, which is, of course, the ultimate website of information because they've got names for everything. But here it says a legacy character is a character whose identity is passed down to them from an older character in the form of a title, job, or persona for the newer character to assume. There are many ways this can come about, and they kind of go through, what is this, 7 different ways that a person could inherit the legacy of an older character. Now, historically, the earliest instance I can see where this was actually a thing in superheroes was with the Flash, because back in the 1940s, DC created a character called the Flash. His name was Jay Garrick, and he got super speed by absorbing hard water molecules, and he gained the superpower of super speed. He dressed a certain way, he was part of a team, and eventually they stopped selling his books because superheroes fell to popularity. And then in the 1950s, superheroes were kind of coming back, and there was a thought, well, let's try and reboot these characters. And so the first one they did this for was the Flash. So what they did is they took the name and the superpower and they changed everything else. And so they had it so the character's name was now Barry Allen, and that he got his powers by being struck by lightning, while at the same time being in a chemical lab or something, and he got hit by lightning and chemicals, and that's what gave him super speed. And Barry Allen had a totally different costume, worked with a different team of superheroes, but he still had the same name and the same power set as the original Flash. So this sort of started the tradition of passing on, I guess, the mantle, or like just the title of a superhero from one character to another. Now, Beef Pork Ribs, being much less of a connoisseur of superheroes than I am, is it confusing to have so many different versions of the same superhero?
I think it depends on the superhero because there are, and that's the problem with, I think, with some legacy characters. There are some that the different iterations are different enough, and I think actually the Flash is one of them, as well as like Robin. There's been many Robins, but they all evolve into different things. Um, in case you've never seen the meme about how Robin is the Eevee of the DC universe, but then sometimes there are some that are not so different, and then it's a little bit harder. Like the different iterations, especially the different iterations of Iron Man that all wear the same suit, it can be really hard to keep track of who's inside the suit if you don't know like exactly what's happening in the comics. Like, because I remember one of the first Marvel comics I read was Secret Wars, and it was not Tony Stark in the suit, but you only found out about 3/4 of the way through when, for the first time, he took part of it off so that Reed Richard could fix it, and you're like, oh, okay, it's a black guy inside the suit. I guess it's not Tony Stark. Um, and they even made a reference to it where he's like, I guess you weren't expecting to see a black man inside of this, and that was a little bit confusing. But then like when you have someone like the Flash, like I feel like whenever somebody mentions the Flash, there's like people who immediately say, "Oh, which one?" Same thing with like the Green Lantern or Robin. Although in the case of Robin, it tends to be a little bit more either Tim Drake or uh, Richard. I forgot
Dick
his
Grayson?
last name. Dick Grayson. That's the one. I But at the same time, I feel like it's something that's existed long enough that now it's not so confusing going into it knowing, but it is definitely something that could cause confusion.
Yeah, I like the way you at the beginning you kind of said, "Oh, like they're too popular to kill." And in a way, I don't think there's a single superhero who has never been, at least for some period of time, been replaced by a different character in their role. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's real brand recognition in superhero comics. In other words, yeah, if they were to just kill off Batman and to no longer publish any comic books about Batman and only tell stories about other Gotham City based characters, that would probably be not nearly as profitable as continuing to publish Batman stories and just have somebody else become Batman.
I think that also the whole like problem with like brand recognition also comes like, and the problem with well, problem if you want to call them a problem with legacy characters at large kind of stems from this this other problem with like not being able to kill off a main character when you want to, which has happened in quite a few instances outside of comics. I thinking you and I are quite familiar with Dragon Ball Z and how Akira Toriyama was really trying to make Gohan the main character, right? After the Cell saga and into the Buu saga, and then but then people got really upset, and all the fans, there was kind of a backlash, and it was like, no, it has to be Goku the main character. And I think something similar happened when uh, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle tried to kill off Sherlock Holmes, and then he had to be like, no, he didn't actually die, because he was literally getting death threats from fans who said, you killed Sherlock Holmes, now we're going to kill you. And I think that it kind of plays into that, not just the marketability, but also the fact that there's a certain sense of betrayal that the fans feel. And um, I think it's kind of sad, because it does speak to this kind of to this idea that creators have to cater to their fans, and even when they feel something would be better off changed, sometimes the company interferes, and it can be a pretty sad story.
Now you kind of mentioned the fans, and it just makes me realize that like superheroes, and I think manga could fall into this too. This kind of serialized storytelling that sort of goes on and on and on without a really defined endpoint. And it's unfortunate. I feel like you at some point you're going to run out of ideas about what to do with this character, and so naturally having them die or disappear or have somebody else take on the main role is naturally, I guess, just where you go with the story. And then it's like when the main person comes back into the role, it's like a new beginning in a sense.
As much as Doctor Who is kind of a loophole to try to bypass that, there are a lot of instances where the new Doctor is like a soft reboot of the entire series. Like I started rewatching the series with Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor, and his first episode, the 11th Hour, is basically an intentional, complete disconnect from the storyline that kind of had held the ninth and 10th Doctors in this kind of sort of same storyline, and it does happen every once in a while, even though they kept the name. So it is, yeah, there is that limit of how much you can do, but I think that because legacy characters are such a thing in media and have become so popular mostly through um, through superheroes, you kind of have this idea that it's okay to do that now, which I think is a double-edged sword, because part of it is you can explore new ideas and new uh, themes. Like, for example, the Batman Beyond series. It was still Batman, but it wasn't Batman. It helped to create kind of a new mythos and explore new things with the character, while still being basically the same character and having enough brand recognition there. It was still possible to change him. But then you could also fall into the trap of, well, we're just going to make any story and give it the name of a legacy character and people will like it. I mean, which is something that kind of happened with the new Joker movie. It's not that it was necessarily a bad movie, but it definitely was riding a lot of its hype on the name, and then afterwards we were like, oh, this was actually still a good movie, even though it wasn't exactly the legacy character we expected.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess, and that's part of the flaw I see with the concept of a legacy character, is that instead of choosing to introduce a new character who has like their own set of abilities and their own like superhero name and their own whatever costume, is that we're just going to allow this character to assume a previously existing superhero role. Like one character that I'm not super familiar with, but I know is really popular, is the current Ms. Marvel, Kamala Khan. The original Ms. Marvel is Carol Danvers, who people who have seen the movies would recognize as Captain Marvel. And she eventually assumed, like, she's been in like two different legacy characters, because she was originally Ms. Marvel and then she became Captain Marvel. And they decided to introduce a new Ms. Marvel in Marvel Comics, a lot of Marvels, in Kamala Khan, who is very different from Ms. like the Carol Danvers character. Not only does she have a totally different set of powers, but instead of being like your typical Caucasian blonde woman, Kamala Khan is a teenager who's originally from Pakistan, so she's Pakistani American, and she's a totally different person in personality to Carol Danvers. So having her assume the role of Ms. Marvel really, like, and that's the other thing too, like those characters had like no connective tissue between them. I think she took up the name Ms. Marvel because she was like inspired by Carol, but in my mind it's like, why not just introduce Kamala as like a whole new character as opposed to like trying to just carry over the, I guess, again, the brand recognition from Ms. Marvel.
I think it falls into the same kind of problem people have with, nothing new is being made in Hollywood. We're all just doing, reboots or remakes of movies. And I think it does go into that it is very hard to come out with an original character or an original movie. It is a lot easier to have an original idea, give it a pre-existing name, and then people will go watch it and still like it, probably or hopefully. It is a lot more of a gamble, but let's be honest, it must be a gamble that pays off more often than not, because otherwise people would not keep making it.
Fair enough. I mean, and I think there's probably certain characters that are more well suited for this idea of the passing of the mantle. You brought up Robin, and Robin in most senses is meant to be Batman's sidekick. So it makes sense that there should always be a Robin in the service of Batman. But having that character change, I suppose, like, it's so confusing because the character isn't changing. And then what's more important? Is it the character of Robin or whatever their like human name is, And that's where I feel like the common person gets confused, because in their mind it's like superhero is like one person. Like the idea of like changing the hat from one person to another is kind of foreign to them. And I think of this. There's we said a lot about Titans a few weeks ago, but there's like one scene where Jason Todd is being introduced to the rest of the Titans, and he's like, "Oh, I'm Robin," and they're like, "Wait, isn't he Robin?"
Hi, I'm Rachel.
Jason. Okay, who we all are doesn't matter right now. Can we just chill out, relax, sit on the couch and watch TV or something?
Yo, when did you get another one?
That one's mine.
Yours? Wait, you're Robin too?
I thought you were Robin.
I am.
He was. Okay. How many Robins are there? Are there a lot? Because I would love
Okay,
to.
quiet.
And that is true. Like, I guess, like you said, I wasn't super as versed in comics as you are, which is true, but I still have enough of a baseline knowledge to know, like, Dick Grayson is not Jason Todd, and what some of the differences are, and why they're a little bit different. But that's true. I did not know that for a long time, so I can understand why it can be confusing. But the other thing is, I feel like legacy characters do tend generally to appear more in comics than in their rehashed media. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Robin in
Meaning to say, like,
movies
yeah,
is almost always Dick Grayson or Jason Todd.
yeah, because the movies, well, that particular series never goes on long enough to have a legacy be introduced.
Yeah, but also, yeah, but at the same time, you could still go through, like, you could still make a new Batman movie, like single Batman movie, and decide that you're going to have Barbara Gordon as Robin, or to have a new Batman movie in which it is set in such a way that Damian Wayne would be Robin, but it almost never happens. It's almost always in movies, usually the first iteration of the character that's reintroduced, even though you could do much more different things. And so it's, even though legacy characters exist, they also usually have the kind of like the better known persona that tends to be the one that other people think about, So like when you do talk to people about Robin, unless you're talking about the comics, usually they will make the proper assumption of who Robin is.
Yeah, and I think the MCU is turning a page there, because they've reached the point post Endgame where I think they are going to introduce the idea of legacy characters. Like, of course, the whole Falcon and Winter Soldier show is going to be about who will be the next Captain America. So I guess we'll see there if we'll call it like the mainstream media culture is able to kind of process this idea of the legacy character.
But also, instead of it being a very relatively niche idea or a fandom, you're introducing it on something that has more mass appeal.
I mean, like, when you came on the Bachelor podcast, you didn't assume the role of Asian Jon. Like, I didn't say, okay, here's the new Asian Jon, everybody. You assumed your own role. And I think like our podcast is a good example of how we really don't have legacy characters, because each persona is so attached to like the person who created it that it wouldn't really make sense to pass the mantle on to somebody else.
I mean, yeah, we could. I could have become Asian John. I mean, it would have had to be Pixel Patch who would become Asian John the second, or the new iteration. It could have been possible, but I think also we did take the approach that we were all adding something different to the podcast rather than having a very similar role. But who knows? Maybe if this podcast becomes extremely popular in the next year and we have millions of subscribers, you might feel the need to bring in a new beef pork ribs when I leave, or it's a possibility. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I don't think you would, because I think from our discussion, neither one of us really likes the idea of legacy characters, but it would be a possibility.
But yeah, I think that brings up the point that certain characters or certain roles, I guess, are more well suited to the idea of a legacy being introduced. Like Average Joe, I mean, that's literally the most common like reference to a person there is an Average Joe. So there could be another Average Joe, but in the instance of the Bachelor podcast, like I'm the Average Joe, and so it would be weird to have somebody else take on that role. But something like Green Lantern, where it's been set up within the universe as this kind of role taken on by anybody who joins this space police force, it makes much more sense. There would be many different Green Lanterns than there would be to have many Average Joes.
Well, I suppose. Let's say, hear me out. Had you, instead of just given Asian John the name Asian John, you could have given him a title as the co-host, and then it would have been set up. And then maybe instead of like different co-hosts, we could have been different fellow nerd or secondary nerd, or secondary geek point of view or something like that. We had like a different name, and now we would just kind of like be, this is our new uh, functional functional normal person to my nerd, and that you could have set it up that it would have worked.
Right. So you're kind of alluding that Asian Jon is indeed like a certain character. Like when you think of Asian Jon, there is a certain like, persona that's attached to that was originated by Asian Jon, and therefore we could only have somebody else call themselves Asian Jon if they did something similar. But at the same time, a lot of these legacy characters actually do something different. So you could technically become Asian Jon and just be a totally different person than the original.
That's true. Kill the Asian John before become the Asian John.
And this actually like brings up a different problem. I call it Super Smash Brothers syndrome, wherein some legacy characters are essentially in some ways clones of the original character. And I compare this to Super Smash Brothers because even as early as the original, some of the additional characters they would introduce were basically just recolored versions of characters that already existed. And like we talked about Miles Morales Spider-Man earlier, like in terms of superpowers and being a teenage superhero, he is very similar to Peter Parker. Obviously, the thing that makes him different most prominently is the fact that he is part African American, part Hispanic, as opposed to being Caucasian. But in terms of just actually functioning as Spider-Man, they're pretty similar.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm sorry. When you said the Super Smash Brothers syndrome, I actually had a totally different thing in mind. I was thinking about the fact that like in later games there was Mario as well as Dr. Mario, and it's like having too many people who have the same mantle be in the same room can cause confusion. But you meant more like characters who were clone of each other, like how like Ganon was basically a heavier Captain Falcon, or Falco was just Star Fox with a different skin.
Yeah, but that's a good point too. Like you have like Toon Link or Young Link in the same room as regular Link, and I've heard people say that like having many versions of the same character kind of really dilutes the brand. So the fact that there are so many Green Lanterns makes it hard for you to be invested in a particular one. Or even with the Spider-Verse thing, like some people don't like the Spider-Verse concept because having all these alternate versions of Spider-Man make the regular ones seem kind of dull by comparison.
Yeah, I can see that. Although Link might not be the best example because different Links in different games are not the same person, but I see your point. I was
So
actually
is
looking
Link
that
then a
up
legacy
because
character?
Link is Link is a legacy character. Although technically it's, if you want to be accurate, it's the Hero of Time. The Hero of Time is a legacy character. He's not always Link in every game. That's when you start talking about the Flash as being the oldest. I'm like, oh, Link. Legend of Zelda games are pretty old, and then I'm like, oh wait, no, you're talking about like the 40s, 50s. But still, yeah, Link is a legacy character. Technically, so is Zelda. The Princess Zelda in Breath of the Wild is not the same Princess Zelda as in most of the other games. She is, however, the holder in all versions, or most versions. Her name is Zelda. Her name is not always Zelda, but she is the holder of the Triforce of Wisdom. And the same thing with Link. Actually, there's a whole lot of things we could get into about who Link is, because the Hero of Time is sometimes right-handed, sometimes left-handed, and there is actually, Nintendo did create a unified timeline that tells you exactly which links are the same. Um, Long story short, basically, the link from the Game Boy games and uh, Ocarina of Time and uh, Majora's Mask are the same. All the other ones are different.
Let's just get into some examples here to kind of flesh this out. So, uh, the Dread Pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride.
I love that you put that in there.
Now, well, that came from, they had that listed on the TV tropes page, and I was like, oh, interesting. I guess technically because that is a mantle that's passed on from person to person.
Although we've only ever seen one iteration of, well, I guess technically at the end, doesn't he make Andre the Giant's character? I forgot his name, but he
Yeah,
names,
I know who you
yeah,
mean though.
yeah, but he names him, or basically makes him the Dread Pirate Roberts at the end, and kind of like drops the mantle for himself.
Would you consider James Bond a legacy character? Because I've always been confused. It's like if James Bond is like a code name that gets carried from one
Well, the
the
thing is, like,
Bond
the
actor to the
movies are
next.
confused about that too, like, because even within the main continuity of the movies, so uh, Sean Connery and I think the
George Lazenby.
first, no, yes, George Lazenby, Sean Connery, and Michael Moore, not Michael, Roger Moore
Oh boy, I'd love to
are,
see Michael Moore
yes,
play James
good
Bond.
lord, but yes, the first three are the same character because the story about James Bond's wife, which happens in Lazenby but has repercussions with Blofeld when Sean Connery comes back and when Roger Moore begins, they're all technically the same continuity. And I think up until Pierce Brosnan, technically they are all the same person. Just different actors took him over. But then with Pierce Brosnan, it kind of has this weird setback where he was a young agent during the Cold War, which may or may not be the same. And then obviously Daniel Craig is a complete change of everything. They even rebooted who Spectre was and how they influenced the story in the world. So he definitely is, although he's a bit of a weirder one because, like, there was always this idea that he could be a legacy character, but they were trying to juggle the fact that they just changed actor for the same character.
Have you seen the movie The Rocketeer?
I sadly have not.
Okay, well, there's a new show for on Disney for little kids called The Rocketeer, and it's about some little girl who basically like finds the Rocketeer's outfit, kind of spray paints it pink, and decides to become the new Rocketeer.
I like it.
And that's, I guess, and that's a good example of a legacy character.
Yeah, and it's also, I don't know, I feel like it's also a good way to do it. We were talking about the Mandalorian, how somebody found Boba Fett's armor and kind of became the protector because he had a Mandalorian armor, and in some way the Mandalorians are setting themselves up to possibly be like legacy characters because really what defines them is the helmet. Obviously, we now know that not all of them refuse to take it off, but if they did all, it's be like, well, it would turn into an Iron Man scenario. Who's underneath the helmet? Who's wearing the suit? Who cares? It is Iron Man.
Now, what about, because at the end of the last Star Wars movie, Rey assumes the name of Skywalker, and I'm
That is
like,
not the same thing. That's
well,
just
it's like it's
that's just Disney pandering to the Star Wars and being dumb and trying to make it so that the main character is a Skywalker even though she's a Palpatine.
fair enough. Now, there's a couple characters from comics that get confusing to talk about, and I bring up Hank Pym and Tim Drake as examples of this. You mentioned Tim Drake. He's been one of the Robins, but throughout his time in the comics, he's used at least two different code names, and he's kind of like floated back and forth between them. At one point, he was Red Robin. At one point, I think he was called Drake, and he was like dressed more like that kind of Drake duck bird than than a Robin. And then he went back to being Robin. Where with Hank Pym, he started as Ant-Man, then he transitioned to Giant Man, then he turned into Yellow Jacket, and then for a time he was also the Wasp.
Yeah, but I feel like Hank Pym. The thing about both of them. I mean, Hank Pym always had the same powers. He just switched them up a bit. It's again. I'll take Iron Man. It's as if you know Tony Stark had decided to take on a different name every time he changed his suit. It's not really that different. You know what I mean? Um, it's the same thing with Tim Drake. I mean, it was a lot less of a change for him, and it was a lot more. It was handled a lot cleaner, I guess. But he still is just the same character with pretty much exactly the same powers and maybe a slight variation in his moral code, but I don't think that that's necessarily one of the more confusing parts for me personally, because it does make more sense for like one person to go through different personas as he evolves as a character, rather than having different characters take on the same persona.
Now, what I've observed in the last 15 years is that DC and Marvel have really used the idea of the legacy character to introduce more diverse versions of their heroes. In other words, instead of like just creating a new character who happens to be from a non-Caucasian ethnic background, they'll do a legacy character upgrade or update of a character who fits that bill. Like Miles Morales, perfect example. There was a time when Sam Wilson, who's usually Falcon, was Captain America. There was a time when Jane Foster was Thor. I mentioned Kamala Khan. The newest version of Blue Beetle in DC Comics would be an example of this. I don't know if this is again like they're trying to just be more diverse, and this is the way they're doing that because original ideas don't do as well as things that already exist.
I think it's the thing also here is that it's kind of a double correction in a sense, because you do have like I think one of the issues, especially with racial variety in comics, is that a lot of the early versions of there are non-Caucasian characters, but a lot of the early versions are very stereotypical and very problematic because of that. And so it's not just kind of trying to add more diversity. It also falls into adding diversity in a place that is well established and respected. And it is definitely easier because, put Miles Morales, make, someone of a, not just one non-Caucasian, but two, like of a diverse ethnic background, make him Spider-Man, and then suddenly it's like, yeah, immigrants can get the job done, to quote uh, Hamilton, and suddenly you do have a character that is well respected already, and you're by making him of a non-Caucasian background, you're not just creating a new stereotype for whatever ethnicity you're targeting, you are really creating something new. Because I mean, there are pretty iconic, African American superheroes, but a lot of them kind of got stuck, at least at the beginning, in their own kind of universe, and a lot of them sadly fighting African American villains exclusively, which is also problematic for a number of other reasons. And so it's it's interesting that yeah, they've been trying to do it, and it does speak to an effort that is being made, but I do definitely think that it would be a better idea to create new ethnically diverse characters who are not stereotypes.
Because the problem this has, at least in the comics now, with like Miles Morales, is that we just have two characters running around calling themselves Spider-Man. And to me, like, it takes away a bit from both Miles and Peter as characters to have them both kind of running around having the same ability set and having similar powers. I know like one character that suffered a lot from this too is like Wally West, who was the third Flash, and he took over as the Flash when Barry Allen died, and then they brought Barry Allen back, but then it kind of left them was like, what do we do about Wally? Because now do we have just two Flashes who dress almost the exact same? And
Kid
they eventually
Flash.
like, well, and they already had somebody else become Kid Flash, so they couldn't have him go back to being, and he was an adult too. He couldn't just be Kid Flash again. So I think there's a genuine problem of having, and maybe I'm just being nitpicky, but having, too many characters with the same name running around.
No, I definitely think it is something that is problematic and something that um something that has caused problems, but at the same time there's another risk that we didn't really talk about. This is something I really like to talk about because I'm a huge nerd. Um, well, and a big fan of the show. Um, One Piece has beaten Spider-Man in lifetime sales of volume of comics, right? And is on its way to being able to beat not Superman, sorry, Batman within the next few years. And One Piece has only had one run. Like, if legacy characters did not exist, it would have like One Piece would have obliterated that, and DC and Marvel would not be holding on to these franchises that have kind of been their bread and butter. And the alternative to that would be moving to something more like what happens in Japan, where you have a lot of different characters that don't necessarily interact with each other and that have individual storylines. But that's not what we have, and I don't think it's something that should be a change. I think that legacy characters are kind of integral to how Western comics work. Should there be more variety within them? Probably. But at the same time, how many awesome characters have been created and became popular because they were attached to a legacy character? You just think of everything that came out of Batman the animated series. Had Batman not been kind of a legacy character, would we have gotten all of those villains or anti-heroes or characters that came out of it? So, like, as much as they are problematic and they are causing problems, there are also some good things that have come out of it.
All right, I think we should probably start to wrap it up. I don't know if we really come to any conclusions here. I do generally like the idea of legacy characters, the idea of kind of passing the mantle from one character to another for various reasons. I think the best example of this in like mainstream culture we see is like the movie The Mask of Zorro, where Antonio Banderas inherits the mantle of Zorro from what's his name, Anthony Hopkins. I think where it gets confusing for the layperson is when you start adding in a third uh, chain in the legacy that kind of goes beyond what we normally would understand to be the case.
Uh, I think if we're giving kind of final thoughts on it, I think that we didn't talk about like directly discuss it, but we kind of hit upon it a few times. If a legacy character is set up to be a legacy character and set up in a way that is coherent within the universe, then it r- resolves a lot of the problems. And I think that's what you got to kind of look at, is trying to make that kind of a move. Is that if you're going to have the Dread Pirate Roberts be different people, then have rumors about the Dread Pirate Roberts from the beginning, and then have it discovered that it wasn't just one person. That that made sense. Nobody really batted an eyelid when that happened in the Princess Bride. So, and same thing with like the way that the Green Lantern Corps is set up. Um, the way that even Robin is set up is like, no, it's just Batman always has a Robin, but Bruce Wayne doesn't always hold on to the same person because, let's be honest, he's not the best father figure out there. So if it's set up properly, I think it can be more beneficial and it can work. The problem is that often it isn't, and people just want the brand recognition. That's when it gets problematic.
All right, let's both just actually as a wrap up kind of list our favorite and least favorite instances of legacy characters. So, yeah, I know this might be a little hard, but I would probably say something like Blue Beetle, I think, is actually my favorite instance of a legacy character in comics. Particularly the current version, Jaime Reyes. He's a totally different character than either of the two previous Blue Beetles that came before him, and he's a much more interesting character. He's got a much more interesting appearance. He's got a better costume, better story, and better stories are told about him. So I got to give it up for Blue Beetle. In terms of like least favorite legacy character, I would say, like, if I'm thinking of like the brand of it being a legacy character, it would probably be, I mean, this is probably cliche, but I would think of like even Superman, because Superman to me is like so associated with Clark Kent and Kal-El that while there have been like instances where somebody else has been Superman, particularly like the reign of the Supermen, that to me it feels weird to think about the identity of Superman being passed on to somebody else.
I'm gonna take a slightly different approach, I guess, and say as my favorite Spider-Man, because even though and that's something we didn't talk about, but like the Amazing Spider-Man and Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man are different people, and yet they're both Peter Parker, and I think that duality and that difference that exists in the characters has allowed the diversity to exist for Spider-Man to create, the different series of movies that have quite a different feel but still work in their own way, and has led to the Spider-Verse eventually, which I think were all good things. Um, and my least favorite, honestly, this is not this is not superhero at all, but I'm gonna say my least favorite is Dracula. It's not really. It seems weird, but I feel like there have been so many terrible iterations of Dracula, and so many weird, different ones. It's a character that was interesting, but just became so changed and so ingrained into something that wasn't really what he was. If you just take the book Dracula, and then you look at what Dracula has become in popular culture, it's a very strange thing, and has started off a bunch of bad stereotypes about vampires that make it kind of odd. So yeah, Dracula.
There you go. So, what do you guys think about legacy characters? Are they good or bad, lazy, creative? Let us know, because we have no mail, and we'll remind you how you could potentially reach out to us.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
Now, this is where we would normally go inside the Bat Jar to pull out our topic for next week. I took some time this week to really refresh the jar and write in all the topics that had kind of come about from our 200th episode we did, and some of the other things we've talked about recently. So the jar is full of topics, but next week has been reserved because while November 17th is also the release anniversary for Justice League, it is also the anniversary of the original airing of the Star Wars Holiday Special. And the people over at Lucasfilm are very cheeky about this, because they have announced that they will launch and drop the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special on November 17th, which means that, yes, coming this Tuesday to your Disney Plus will be the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special. And so that will be our topic for next week. We're going to dive right into whatever that ends up being. I hope it's funny. I'm sure it will not be nearly as cringeworthy as the original holiday special, because how could it?
Lego has proved itself also very competent in making good movies.
Yeah, so B4 Gribs, are you excited for the Lego holiday special?
I did not know it existed, but yeah, I am, and it's much better than you forcing me to watch the original.
And until next time, when we talk about the Lego Star Wars holiday special, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
Married life is actually great. You should all try it.